Hello and welcome to Journey Through Time, your calm gateway into the deep past. A place where curiosity moves slowly, and science invites you to imagine worlds beyond imagination. Tonight, rather than thinking in minutes or years, picture an age so immense that even the word ancient feels too new. We're drifting back to the Mesozoic Era, a time when Earth carried a face unrecognizable to us. Seas alive with reptilian hunters, skies crowded with wings unlike any modern bird, and forests that felt like alien worlds. Dinosaurs were only part of the spectacle. Oceans held swift predators, insects hummed across vast landscapes, and climates rose and fell in pulses long before humans appeared to ask what it all meant. Close your eyes and envision it. Continents were not yet separated into today's familiar shapes. Instead, they formed one vast landmass, Pangaea, wrapped by immense oceans and strange coastlines. The air itself was different, filled with volcanic gases and chemicals exhaled by plants, unlike those we know. No flowers yet perfumed the wind. No buzzing bees wove through blossoms. Instead, strange conifers, cycads, and ginkgos dominated. The soundtrack of that world was alien too. The calls of early reptiles, the crash of waves on coastlines we would not recognize, and the sigh of wind moving through forests of needle-leaved trees. This era began in the aftermath of disaster. The Permian extinction had wiped away roughly 90% of marine species and much of life on land. The Mesozoic rose from those ruins as a grand rebuilding project, life experimenting with new shapes and new strategies after catastrophe. In vast red deserts baked by a relentless sun, rivers cut green corridors where amphibians thrived and early reptiles darted. The first ancestors of dinosaurs were only just beginning to appear, small and tentative, part of a world still testing itself. Spanning roughly 186 million years, the Mesozoic stretches far beyond recorded human history. Entire mountain chains could rise and erode away within this single chapter. Calling it the Age of Dinosaurs hides its true breadth. It was also the age of drifting continents, reshaped oceans, new climates, and plants quietly rewriting the landscape. Imagine skies ruled not by birds, but by pterosaurs, some as small as sparrows, and others with wingspans like small planes. Picture oceans alive with ichthyosaurs shaped like living torpedoes, long-necked plesiosaurs weaving through shoals of fish, and later, monstrous mosasaurs dominating the seas. Coral reefs were built not by corals alone, but by unfamiliar sponges and bivalves. Ammonites, spiral-shelled relatives of squid, drifted by the millions, feeding and being fed upon. On land, dense conifer forests rose like cathedrals, their crowns dark and high. Horsetails and ferns filled the undergrowth. There were no flowering plants yet, so the world's palette was greens, browns, and grays, with cones instead of blossoms. Into this green world came dinosaurs, first small and almost unnoticed, then larger and more varied. Some walked on 2 legs, some on 4. Over time, they evolved into giants, sauropods longer than buses, predators like Allosaurus, and eventually Tyrannosaurus. Yet the Mesozoic was not just about size. Mammals scurried beneath the foliage, insects adapted to new plants, and isolation between drifting continents drove species apart into unique forms. Fossils from these times are not just bones, but pages of a book we are still learning to read. Layers of ash, sediment, and petrified forests capture the memory of climate shifts and extinctions. Each horizon of rock is a moment in a 200 million year experiment. Dinosaurs were only one thread in this web. They grazed on plants that built the forests, opened gaps for sunlight to reach the ground and left carcasses that scavengers cleaned. Insects pollinated the first flowering plants toward the end of the era. Even in its most spectacular scenes, the Mesozoic was a crowded, interconnected stage. Picture a Jurassic Valley, conifers scenting the air with resin, cycads standing like green fountains, and a herd of sauropods swaying their necks above the canopy. Smaller creatures scuttle between trunks, early mammals the size of mice, sharp-nosed and nocturnal, lizards hugging warm stones and watching the skies. Crocodile-like reptiles lurk in rivers, and pterosaurs ride thermals overhead, scanning for fish or an unwary meal. Underfoot, insects tunnel and recycle plant matter. The dinosaurs were never alone. They were part of an intricate negotiation of survival, just as animals are today. Early in the Triassic, other reptile groups dominated. Pseudo-crocodiles thrived in armored or agile forms. Beaked or plated archosaurs tested evolutionary designs. Dinosaurs began as small, light-boned creatures, relatively unimpressive next to these rulers. But shifts in climate and geography tipped the balance. By the end of the Triassic, many crocodile relatives were gone, and dinosaurs expanded to fill the vacant roles. Even so, they shared the planet with amphibians, marine reptiles, and the earliest mammals. Each movement of one group rippled through the others, shaping an evolving ecosystem. The seas mirrored this complexity. Marine reptiles abandoned land entirely. Ammonites floated in spirals, and coral-like reefs created hubs of biodiversity. Ocean currents influenced climates and coastlines, forging habitats on land. Insects buzzed constantly, pollinating gymnosperms or feeding on each other, forming the hidden foundation of food webs. Mammals experimented with burrowing, gliding, and nocturnal hunting, ready to survive in the niches left open at night. These unsung neighbors were the resilience built into Earth's system, prepared to step forward when the age of reptiles ended. Calling it the Age of Reptiles is accurate, but incomplete. Reptiles set the tone, but mammals, insects, and plants provided the backdrop and the continuity. Terrestrial giants like sauropods were mirrored by marine lizards and winged pterosaurs. Across nearly 200 million years, reptiles occupied every niche, but change was constant. New groups emerged, old ones vanished, climates shifted, and continents drifted apart. The architecture of the world we live in now, its coasts, its climates, its diversity, was laid down during this immense era. This is the first part of the story, the opening sweep of the Mesozoic, showing how Earth remade itself after disaster and set. From that first great sweep of the Mesozoic, the story narrows into the Triassic, the age of survival and experimentation. This period opens with a planet still scarred by the greatest extinction in Earth's history, the Permian event. Oceans stripped of their reefs, landscapes emptied of forests, and climates turned harsh under volcanic skies. Yet even in such devastation, life persisted. Ferns sprouted on bare ground, followed by hardy conifers and cycads. Amphibians lingered in the shadows of rivers, while early reptiles, some armored, some quick-footed, tested new body plans. The Triassic was a laboratory of possibility. At first, no single group dominated. Crocodile ancestors and other archosaurs spread across the supercontinent of Pangaea. Some were plated herbivores trudging across plains. Others were sleek predators running upright on long legs. Dinosaurs existed only as small, nimble newcomers, lightly built, upright, with efficient lungs and hollow bones. They were not yet the giants of later ages, but a scattered lineage living among more imposing reptiles. Picture this world, a supercontinent stretching from pole to pole, its interior, a furnace of deserts and dust. Along coasts and river valleys, patches of green offered life a foothold. Cycads rising like spiny palms, conifers spreading resin-scented shade, and rivers thick with amphibians lurking for prey. Volcanism reshaped the land repeatedly. Lava fields cooled to black stone, then were colonized by ferns, only to be buried again. Insects buzzed across these evolving habitats, recycling matter and pollinating the first gymnosperms. This was a world of resilience, where survival meant flexibility. Marine life mirrored the uncertainty. The seas were warm and oxygen-poor in many regions, but gradually new food webs emerged. Shoals of fish recovered, ammonites proliferated, and reptiles began venturing from land into water full-time. Early ichthyosaurs appeared, their bodies still clumsy compared to later streamlined forms, but already hinting at a dolphin-like silhouette. Nothosaurs prowled shallow coasts, snapping fish with long, toothy jaws. The ocean, like the land, was reassembling itself. Through tens of millions of years, dinosaurs slowly gained an edge. Their upright posture allowed efficient movement. Their lungs drew more oxygen from the air, and their lightweight skeletons helped them disperse across the supercontinent. They remained minor players until a sudden upheaval at the end of the Triassic. Massive volcanic eruptions split Pangaea, flooding the atmosphere with carbon dioxide. Climate chaos followed, driving another mass extinction that decimated many dominant reptiles, including most crocodile relatives. When the dust settled, dinosaurs were among the survivors, poised to expand into the empty niches. Thus began the Jurassic, a period of warmth, greenness, and abundance. Pangaea cracked apart, forming new coastlines, rift valleys, and inland seas. Rainfall increased, deserts shrank, and forests spread across fertile floodplains. This transformed landscape fed a surge of dinosaur diversity. Herbivorous dinosaurs became enormous, taking full advantage of abundant vegetation. Sauropods like Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus stretched necks into the canopy or swept them low across plains, stripping foliage in tons each day. Their footprints could hold pools of rainwater, their movements reshaping entire ecosystems. Alongside the sauropods grazed other plant eaters, stegosaurs with double rows of plates and spiked tails, early ornithopods nibbling versatile diets, and armored species adapted to low vegetation. These herbivores fed not just themselves, but the predators and scavengers of the Jurassic. Allosaurus, one of the era's apex predators, stalked plains and forests with powerful jaws and blade-like teeth. Smaller theropods darted through undergrowth, while pterosaurs circled overhead, scanning for carcasses or fish. The Jurassic seas flourished as well. Ichthyosaurs had become true marine specialists, streamlined like torpedoes. Plesiosaurs, with long necks and small heads, glided through shallows propelled by flippers. Marine crocodiles patrolled coastlines, ammonites floated in spirals, and coral-like reefs slowly rebuilt after the Permian collapse. These oceans were warm, connected, and rich, the aquatic counterpart to the lush land ecosystems. Plants were the silent architects of this world. Conifers dominated forests, cycads and ginkgos spread across plains and temperate zones. Ferns carpeted the undergrowth, and horsetails thrived in wetlands. This greenery produced the oxygen and food that sustained the giants. The air was thick with the scent of resin and spores. Greenhouse conditions reached nearly to the poles, and fossil wood from the Arctic and Antarctic reveals ginkgo and conifer forests, growing where ice now reigns. Dinosaurs adapted to long periods of darkness at high latitudes, but never faced frozen tundras. Across drifting continents, regional differences emerged. North America's floodplains supported vast sauropod herds, and large predators. Europe broke into islands hosting unique dwarfed species. Africa and Asia developed their own communities, each with distinct adaptations. Yet the pattern repeated everywhere. Abundant vegetation, enormous plant eaters, and agile predators. Dinosaurs were no longer minor players. They were the architects of ecosystems, shaping vegetation by their grazing and shaping predator populations by their sheer numbers. Social behavior amplified their success. Evidence suggests some sauropods moved in herds, their young protected in the middle. Stegosaurs may have used their plates for display as much as defense, signaling to each other across distances. Predators may have coordinated or at least tolerated group feeding. These behaviors hint at intelligence and flexibility, qualities that helped dinosaurs thrive in a dynamic world. To walk in the Jurassic is to enter a moving tapestry. Herds of sauropods crossing plains, predators shadowing them, pterosaurs gliding on warm currents, ferns crushed underfoot, rivers swelling with seasonal rains. Calls echoed through forests, marine reptiles splashed along coasts, insects hummed constantly, a living soundscape as immersive as any modern rainforest. This was a planet built for abundance. The rise of dinosaurs from their humble Triassic origins to their Jurassic dominance was not a straight line, but a patient climb. They seized opportunity after catastrophe, expanded when conditions allowed, and diversified to fill nearly every ecological role on land. They were now the undisputed rulers of the terrestrial world, yet still connected to oceans, skies, and plants in a single global system. This was the middle act of the Mesozoic, an age of giants built on resilience, adaptability, and deep time. As the Mesozoic world matured, its atmosphere and landscapes kept evolving. In the earliest Triassic, Earth was still clawing its way out of cataclysm. The Great Extinction at the end of the Permian had emptied oceans, burned forests, and stripped the sky of stability. Volcanoes poured gases, raising carbon dioxide to levels far beyond today's, baking the land into vast deserts. If you had stood on that supercontinent, the heat would have shimmered off bare rock, and your lungs would have labored under air thick with dust and carbon dioxide. Oxygen had dropped perilously low. Yet slowly, life rebounded. Plants spread across the land again, capturing carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen, though never reaching today's balance. Conifers and cycads crept into new territories, seeding river valleys and coastlines, while the interiors of continents remained arid. These uneven conditions favored reptiles with efficient lungs and heat-tolerant bodies. Mammals, still tiny and mostly nocturnal, retreated to cooler hours, waiting out the daylight. By the Jurassic, oxygen levels had risen, perhaps even surpassing modern concentrations, while carbon dioxide remained high enough to keep the world warm. This changed everything. Lush forests expanded, amphibians clung to wetlands, and dinosaurs grew larger. High oxygen allowed enormous sauropods to sustain their immense bodies, and elevated carbon dioxide allowed plants to grow rapidly, producing food in volumes sufficient for entire herds of giants. The very air itself enabled creatures of unprecedented size. Monsoons swept across continents, bringing seasonal rains to once dry interiors. Forests of ferns, cycads, and conifers spread widely, their humidity supporting an explosion of life. Even the poles were mild enough for forests, with ginkgo and conifers growing in places where snow now dominates. Dinosaurs adapted to long periods of darkness at high latitudes, but never faced true freezing conditions. The greenhouse world extended from equator to pole. As the Cretaceous dawned, the atmosphere shifted yet again. Carbon dioxide rose to 4 to 6 times modern levels, Sea levels climbed, flooding continents with shallow inland seas. North America split in two under the western interior seaway, becoming a mosaic of deltas and wetlands. Europe broke into a chain of islands. Flowering plants, having emerged earlier in the Cretaceous, spread rapidly in this warmth, reshaping ecosystems. Forests flourished, weaving a new tapestry of life. Polar regions endured long periods of darkness and light, creating unique seasonal rhythms. Evidence shows rain-soaked forests even near the poles, watered by the greenhouse climate. Animals adapted to constant adjustment. Storms without warning, seasons stretched differently from ours. Earthquakes reminded creatures of the planet's instability as tectonic plates shifted and continents split apart. Faults rumbled, riverbeds shifted, and whole habitats transformed overnight. Some of the most dramatic volcanic events came toward the end of the Cretaceous. Immense eruptions in what is now India built the Deccan Traps, pouring lava over vast regions, darkening skies with gases, and shifting climate patterns abruptly. Some scientists believe these eruptions worked hand in hand with the asteroid impact to drive the mass extinction that closed the Mesozoic. Either way, volcanic power shaped the fate of life on a planetary scale. To imagine living then is to stand in a world always unsettled. A herd of ceratopsians grazing one year might see ash falling the next. A population of marine reptiles thriving in a seaway might lose its food source when currents shifted. A forest could grow lush on volcanic soil and be flattened by a storm overnight. Stability existed but was fragile. Disruptions forced adaptation or annihilation. Yet life endured. Animals migrated, diversified their diets, or developed new behaviors to survive. Plants colonized disturbed ground quickly, exploiting volcanic soils or storm-cleared terrain. Resilience became as important as strength. Fossilized ash layers trapped plants and animals caught in sudden disasters. Storm deposits record waves, sweeping bones together. Layers of volcanic rock mark intense eruptions, while isotopes in sediments trace climate swings driven by gases. The image of a stable paradise of dinosaurs is incomplete. The Mesozoic was a world of abundance but also upheaval. Volcanoes poured fire, storms lashed coasts, earthquakes shook plains, and climate swung between extremes. The creatures that thrived were not only large or fierce, but those capable of enduring change, adjusting to disruption, and surviving Earth's restlessness. The planet was not a passive stage, but an active participant, gentle and violent in turn, always shaping life. Meanwhile, plants themselves were transforming. Ginkgos, once diverse, spread their fan-shaped leaves across the northern hemisphere, their seeds feeding reptiles and early mammals. Ferns carpeted forest floors, horsetails formed dense stands along rivers and swamps, and seed ferns clung on from older ages. These plants had already endured for hundreds of millions of years and adapted to the new world, weaving the green fabric that supported herbivores at every scale. Without them, dinosaurs could never have reached their colossal sizes. Then came the great shift of flowering plants, angiosperms, in the Cretaceous. Initially small and overshadowed by conifers and cycads, they brought entirely new strategies for reproduction. Flowers attracted insects and later birds to carry pollen, far more efficient than wind pollination. Fruits evolved to entice animals to disperse seeds. Within tens of millions of years, flowering plants spread worldwide, reshaping food webs. Landscapes gained bursts of color never before seen: yellows, reds, purples. Dinosaurs themselves may have eaten early fruits or carried pollen on their skin unknowingly. Late Cretaceous forests were no longer the same as Triassic groves. They were busier, brighter, and more interconnected. Conifers persisted, cycads survived in tropical pockets, and ginkgos clung on as living fossils. Ferns and horsetails endured with little change. To look at these plants today is to glimpse the Mesozoic directly, a continuity stretching back over 200 million years. When you imagine dinosaurs, it is in these forests of giants that they truly belong. The rise of dinosaurs, the sway of forests, restless oceans, skies alive with wings, shifting climates, and the slow bloom of flowers. To ask what Earth was like in the Mesozoic is to step into a story that spans nearly 200 million years. When most people picture that time, their minds leap to the giants, towering sauropods casting shadows across valleys, armored beasts clanking through forests, and predators with jaws powerful enough to snap bone in an instant. But for much of their reign, dinosaurs were not solitary rulers striding across empty landscapes. They were surrounded by countless neighbors, in ecosystems as bustling and complicated as any modern rainforest or savanna. To understand that world, you have to look beyond the famous animals to the entire stage they shared. Imagine standing in a Jurassic valley, the air thick with resin from conifers and damp ferns underfoot. To one side, a herd of sauropods moves slowly, their necks swaying high above the canopy as they strip branches bare. Closer to the ground, smaller creatures scurry between tree trunks, tiny mammals no bigger than mice, darting through leaf litter at night, sharp noses sniffing for insects. Early lizards hug the warmth of rocks, watching warily for anything that might swoop or pounce. Dinosaurs were there, but they were only one part of a constant negotiation of survival. On the open plains, herds of plant-eating dinosaurs gathered together like modern wildebeest, their footsteps shaking the earth and leaving tracks that would fossilize for us to study. Yet they did not have the landscape to themselves. Crocodile-like reptiles lurked in rivers and lakes, waiting for the moment a thirsty animal leaned too far toward the water. Flying overhead, pterosaurs rode thermals, scanning for fish or carrion, or perhaps the chance to snatch something small and unlucky. In the soil beneath it all, insects crawled, tunneling and feeding, recycling plant matter, keeping the cycle of life turning in ways rarely noticed, but vitally important. The Mesozoic wasn't a tidy story of one group rising while all others faded. It was a crowded stage. In the early Triassic, after the Great Extinction, other reptile groups were far more dominant. Ancestors of crocodiles, called pseudosuchians, flourished in many forms, some like armored tanks, others running quickly on two legs, filling niches dinosaurs wouldn't claim until much later. Strange archosaurs with beaked faces, plated backs, and experimental adaptations hint at evolution's workshop, a time of prototypes and shifting rules. The Earth itself was still recovering, ecosystems rebuilding from ruin. Dinosaurs at first were small, light-boned, relatively unimpressive compared to bulkier reptiles. They lingered in the background until shifts in climate and environment tipped the balance in their favor. Even then, they never lived alone. Crocodile relatives continued alongside them. Amphibians held on in wet places. Mammals scurried in the dark, and the seas beyond the shores swarmed with marine reptiles and ammonites. As time passed, dinosaurs expanded into new roles. Herbivores diversified into armored stegosaurs, horned ceratopsians, and later hadrosaurs. Carnivores split into nimble hunters and apex predators. Each innovation reshaped ecosystems, forcing other species to adapt in turn. Some dinosaurs grew feathers, perhaps for insulation, display, or gliding. Birds would eventually emerge from these feathered theropods, carrying the legacy of the Mesozoic into the skies of the modern world. plants continued to transform the planet as well. Angiosperms spread, drawing insects and creating new food webs. Fruits enticed animals, spreading seeds and accelerating change. The quiet work of plants underpinned the spectacular life of dinosaurs. Forests generated oxygen, stabilized soils, and moderated climate. Without them, no giant could thrive. Even in its most dramatic scenes, the Mesozoic was a story of connection. Predator and prey, plant and herbivore, insect and flower, all intertwined. Every trackway in stone, every nest of eggs, every fossilized forest floor is a message across time, showing how life once moved together. Museums hold these voices in silent halls, yet every time we look at them, we bridge an unimaginable span of time. Dinosaurs live in our imaginations, in ways few extinct creatures do. From childhood toys to films, books to television, they have become symbols of power and fragility. We see them as unstoppable giants, but also know they perished in an instant of cosmic chance. They remind us of life's strength and its vulnerability. This duality resonates with us as we measure our own place in Earth's story. The Mesozoic is not only a fascination for paleontologists, it's a foundation of our world, one that continues to shape our ecosystems. By studying it, we learn about resilience, adaptation, and the cycles of change that govern the planet. The warmth of that era, the rise and fall of sea levels, the impact of volcanism, and finally the sudden catastrophe of an asteroid all teach us that life responds to change, sometimes adapting, sometimes failing. The extinction that closed the Mesozoic warns that stability can be fragile, that ecosystems can collapse quickly under stress. Yet there is continuity in smaller details. The way birds preen their feathers, the way crocodiles slip silently through water, the way lizards bask in the sun, all are behaviors that existed in some form in the Mesozoic. They are everyday actions linking us to creatures we will never see alive, but can still understand. In this way, the Mesozoic has never truly ended. It continues through surviving lineages, persistent behaviors, and the enduring shape of ecosystems. Thinking in millions of years stretches our perspective beyond daily life. It forces us to see that we are part of something vast, a continuity, including creatures long gone. The Mesozoic teaches patience, humility, and awe. It reminds us we are temporary participants in a much longer story, one that began long before us and will continue long after. When we step outside and hear birdsong, see flowers bloom in spring, or watch rivers carve paths through mountains, we are surrounded by reminders of that world. The echoes of the Mesozoic are not locked in stone. They breathe through every living thing around us. When we think about the end of the Mesozoic, we often picture one instant, an asteroid blazing through the sky, striking Earth and wiping out the dinosaurs. Yet like the entire era before it, the ending was a complex story, not a single moment. By the late Cretaceous, Earth was already under stress. Volcanic activity in the Deccan Traps had been pouring out lava and gases for hundreds of thousands of years, altering climate patterns and ocean chemistry. Sea levels were high, continents partly flooded by shallow inland seas, and ecosystems finely balanced. Into this delicate world came the asteroid impact near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. In an instant, it released energy beyond any weapon humans have ever imagined, vaporizing rock, igniting wildfires, and throwing dust and sulfur into the atmosphere. Darkness spread across the globe. Photosynthesis faltered, food chains collapsed, and ecosystems unraveled. This was the event that ended the age of non-avian dinosaurs, along with countless other species on land and in the oceans. But as catastrophic as it was, the impact did not erase everything. Some lineages survived. Birds, descendants of small feathered theropods, made it through, carrying dinosaur DNA into the modern world. Mammals, small and adaptable, endured the chaos, emerging into a transformed Earth where new opportunities waited. Crocodilians, turtles, and many plants weathered the storm as well. Life did not stop. It reshaped itself, as it had after previous mass extinctions. This pattern, devastation followed by renewal, runs through Earth's history. The Mesozoic itself rose from the ashes of the Permian extinction. The Cenozoic that followed rose from the ashes of the Mesozoic's end. Each mass extinction clears ecological space and resets the evolutionary stage. In the voids left behind, survivors diversify, adapt, and experiment. In this sense, every living creature today carries the legacy of these ancient crises, a living echo of survival. Fossils are our window into this story. A skeleton preserved in stone is not just bone. It's a memory of a life lived. A trackway frozen in mud records the steps of a herd across a floodplain. A nest of eggs captures the moment of reproduction, an attempt to carry life forward to the next generation. Each fossil is a message across time, an imprint of existence speaking long after the creatures themselves are gone. Museums hold these voices, and each time we look at them, we connect across an almost unimaginable span of time. Dinosaurs hold a special place in our imagination because they embody both power and fragility. We see them as unstoppable giants, yet we also know they perished in an instant of cosmic chance. This duality resonates deeply, reminding us of life's strength, but also of its vulnerability. There is something profoundly humbling in realizing that the ground beneath our feet holds these memories. Every layer of rock is a page of history. Within those pages are the remains of forests, seas, and creatures that lived long before us. Studying the Mesozoic is not just about dinosaurs, but about resilience, adaptation, and the cycles of change that govern the planet. When we consider modern climate change, the echoes of the Mesozoic remind us what happens when conditions shift. Warmth rising, sea levels fluctuating, volcanism altering the air, and sudden catastrophes reshaping life. These lessons from the deep past underscore that stability can be fragile and that ecosystems can collapse quickly under stress. Yet continuity persists in subtle ways. Birds preen their feathers, as their dinosaur ancestors once did. Crocodiles slip silently through water, as they have for over 200 million years. Lizards bask in the sun, as reptiles always have. These everyday actions link us across time to creatures we will never see alive, but can still understand. In this way, the Mesozoic never truly ended. It continues through surviving lineages, persistent behaviors, and the enduring architecture of ecosystems. Thinking in millions of years stretches our sense of time beyond daily concerns. It forces us to see ourselves as part of something vast, a continuity, including creatures long gone. The Mesozoic teaches patience, humility, and awe. It reminds us that we are temporary participants in a much longer story, one that began long before us and will continue long after. When we step outside and hear birdsong, see flowers bloom, or watch rivers carve their paths through mountains, we are surrounded by reminders of that ancient world. The legacy of the Mesozoic is not locked away in stone. It lives in the flight of birds, the persistence of reptiles, the structure of our forests, and even in the climate rhythms of our planet. Every breath we take contains oxygen from plants, descended from those ancient forests. Every coastline bears the imprint of continental drift set in motion during the age of dinosaurs. We are walking through the aftermath of their world, built on foundations they helped shape. In the end, the Mesozoic is both a vanished time and an enduring presence. Its creatures are gone, yet its influence surrounds us. By looking back, we see not only what was lost, but what continues. Journeying through this era is to journey through our own origins, to see how life survives catastrophe, reshapes itself, and continues on. Most of the Mesozoic unfolded not in its spectacular cataclysms, but in the steady rhythm of everyday life. Dinosaurs fed, rested, raised their young, and moved with the sun's cycles. Plants grew, flowered, and spread seeds. Insects buzzed and crawled. This extraordinary age was built out of ordinary days, each one a thread in the fabric of deep time. If you could stand quietly in that world and watch a single day pass, you would see animals interacting, landscapes shifting in light and shadow, the continuity of life echoing across millions of years. It would feel both alien and familiar. Strange creatures in unfamiliar forms, but behaviors you could still recognize in modern animals. Grazing, hunting, nesting, protecting their young. By the late Cretaceous, life seemed unshakable. Herds of ceratopsians roamed North America. Hadrosaurs filled river valleys, and sauropods still dominated the southern hemisphere. Predators like Tyrannosaurus and Allosaurus ruled the hunt. The seas teemed with mosasaurs and plesiosaurs. The skies belonged to pterosaurs, and the first true birds and flowering plants had spread into every corner of the land. It was a flourishing world, balanced between predator and prey, plant and consumer, sea and land. Yet beneath that appearance of stability, forces were gathering that would change everything. Toward the end of the Cretaceous, volcanic eruptions in what is now India poured out vast flows of lava, known as the Deccan Traps. These eruptions released carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide, altering climate over thousands of years, sometimes warming it with greenhouse gases, sometimes cooling it as aerosols reflected sunlight. Life adapted as it always had during the Mesozoic, but the world was unsettled even before the final blow arrived. That blow came about 66 million years ago, when an asteroid roughly 10 kilometers wide struck near the Yucatan Peninsula in present-day Mexico. In an instant, unimaginable energy was released. The impact blasted a crater more than 180 kilometers across, threw vast amounts of rock and dust into the sky, and generated shockwaves that spread across the globe. Within hours, tsunamis surged across coastlines. Forests near the impact zone were flattened or set ablaze, and the sky itself began to change. Fires spread not only from the initial explosion, but also from debris re-entering the atmosphere. As ejecta rained down, friction heated the air, igniting global wildfires. Charcoal deposits in sediments from this time record the scale of the burning. Entire landscapes engulfed. For animals and plants alive at that moment, survival meant more than avoiding predators or finding food. It meant escaping fire and smoke spreading across continents. In the days and weeks after the impact, skies darkened. Dust, ash, and aerosols filled the atmosphere, blocking sunlight. Photosynthesis faltered as plants lost access to light, and with it, the foundation of food chains began to collapse. Herbivores lost their food, predators lost their prey, and ecosystems unraveled. This impact winter may have lasted months or years, plunging the planet into cold as sunlight failed to warm the surface. Temperatures dropped sharply, challenging species already stressed by fire and famine. The seas also bore the weight of disaster. Tsunamis reshaped coastlines, sediments choked marine habitats, and sudden climate shifts altered currents. Ocean ecosystems collapsed alongside those on land. This was the endgame of the Mesozoic, a global convergence of volcanism, asteroid impact, fire, darkness, and cold, a test of life's resilience on a planetary scale. Yet even here, survival flickered. Some species persisted through the chaos. Birds, small mammals, crocodilians, turtles, and certain plants endured. They were the seeds of the next era, carrying forward into the Cenozoic. As before, devastation would be followed by renewal. The dinosaurs' world ended, but life itself did not. The thin clay layer rich in iridium, found worldwide, marks the boundary between the Cretaceous and the Paleogene. Iridium is rare on Earth's surface, but common in asteroids, a fingerprint of the impact. This layer, found on every continent, records the dust that settled after the skies cleared. Fossils below it tell of the Mesozoic's abundance, while above it lies the record of a new world. It is not just a marker of extinction, but of transformation. Without the asteroid, dinosaurs might have continued to dominate for millions of years. Mammals, still small and marginal in the late Cretaceous, may never have had their chance to rise. Human history itself is tied to that moment, a distant consequence of that single day of impact. To imagine the event is to imagine chaos on a scale beyond comprehension. A bright streak in the sky, a deafening impact, shock waves flattening everything for hundreds of kilometers, tsunamis rising higher than any waves in memory, forests igniting spontaneously, skies darkening until day turned to twilight, temperatures plunging until even the strongest animals faltered. And yet, amidst devastation, life endured in small, tenacious forms, carrying forward into a new age. The great ending of the Mesozoic was not only an end, but also a beginning. In the aftermath, as ecosystems rebuilt, mammals diversified, birds spread, and flowering plants continued their expansion. The Cenozoic dawned from the ashes of the Cretaceous, a new chapter shaped by the survivors of extinction. The world of today, with its diversity of mammals, birds, and flowering plants, is the legacy of that transformation. When we think of the Mesozoic, we must hold in mind not only its long ages of dinosaurs and seas of reptiles, but also its sudden and violent close. Fire, darkness, and extinction brought down the giants. But from that upheaval came a new world, one that would eventually give rise to us. The story did not end with the asteroid. It turned, and life moved on, carrying the imprint of that catastrophe into every species that followed. When we walk through the world today, it's easy to think of the Mesozoic as gone, a vanished chapter buried beneath rock and time. The dinosaurs no longer stride across plains. The seas are no longer ruled by mosasaurs or ichthyosaurs. The skies no longer filled with giant pterosaurs. And yet, when we look closely, the echoes of that age surround us in ways both visible and hidden. Every pigeon on a city street, every crow perched on a wire, every hawk soaring above farmland is a descendant of theropod dinosaurs. Their hollow bones, feathers, and eggs all trace back to ancestors in the Jurassic and Cretaceous. When you hear the song of a sparrow at dawn, you are hearing the distant voice of creatures that shared their world with Triceratops and Ankylosaurus. The very act of flight, so effortless in a gull skimming the surf or a swallow darting after insects, is a living continuation of experiments in the skies that began with pterosaurs and early birds. The dinosaurs did not truly vanish. Their lineage, transformed, continues to this day, a reminder that extinction is rarely absolute and that evolution can bridge even the deepest divides of time. In that sense, Every human walking today is part of the legacy of that ancient catastrophe, a living echo of survival that carried life into the Cenozoic. The fossils themselves are echoes, silent yet powerful. When we find a skeleton preserved in stone, we are seeing not just bones, but a memory of a life lived. A trackway frozen in mud records the steps of a herd across a floodplain. A nest of eggs captures the moment of reproduction, an attempt to carry life forward into the next generation. Each fossil is a message across time, an imprint of existence speaking long after the creatures themselves are gone. Museums are filled with these voices. Every time we look at them, we connect across an almost unimaginable span of time. But the echoes are not only physical, they are also cultural. Dinosaurs live in our imagination in ways few other extinct creatures do. From childhood toys to films, from books to television, they have become symbols of both power and fragility. We see them as unstoppable giants, yet we also know they perished in an instant of cosmic chance. They remind us of the strength of life, but also its vulnerability. This duality resonates with us deeply as we measure our own place in the story of Earth. There is something profoundly humbling in realizing that the ground beneath our feet holds these memories. Every layer of rock is a page of history. Within those pages lie the remains of forests, seas, and creatures that lived long before us. The Mesozoic is not only a time of fascination for paleontologists, it is part of the foundation of our world, shaping the structure of ecosystems and life itself. By studying it, we learn not only about dinosaurs, but about resilience, adaptation, and the cycles of change that govern the planet. When we consider climate change today, the echoes of the Mesozoic remind us what happens when conditions shift. The warmth of that era, the rise and fall of sea levels, the impact of volcanism, and finally the sudden catastrophe of an asteroid all teach us that life responds to change, sometimes adapting, sometimes failing. The extinction that closed the Mesozoic warns us that stability can be fragile, that ecosystems can collapse quickly under stress. Yet in these echoes, there are lessons not only about the past, but about our future. Continuity survives in the smaller details, the way birds preen their feathers, the way crocodiles slip silently through water, the way lizards bask in the sun. All are behaviors that existed in some form in the Mesozoic. They are everyday actions linking us to creatures we will never see alive, but can still understand. In this way, the Mesozoic has never truly ended. It continues through the survival of lineages, the persistence of behaviors, and the enduring shape of ecosystems. The echoes reach even further into the human imagination of time itself. Thinking in terms of millions of years stretches our perspective beyond the scale of daily life. It forces us to see that we are part of something vast, a continuity that includes creatures long gone. The Mesozoic teaches patience, humility, and awe. It reminds us we are temporary participants in a much longer story, one that began long before us and will continue long after. And so, when we step outside and hear birdsong, when we look at flowers blooming in spring, when we see mountains rising in the distance or rivers carving their paths, we are surrounded by reminders of that world. The echoes of the Mesozoic are not locked away in stone. They are alive in the living earth around us. Even the oceans tell the story. Ancient seas might suggest quiet waters, but the truth is, they were endlessly dynamic, full of creatures claiming dominance long before mammals considered the shoreline. At the dawn of the Mesozoic, after the devastation of the Permian extinction, the oceans were nearly empty. Coral reefs had collapsed, shellfish and fish species wiped away, and the water itself chemically unstable. But as the Triassic dawned, the seas rebuilt themselves. New corals returned, sponges took hold, mollusks diversified, and shoals of fish began to recover, soon attracting larger hunters. Into this fresh slate of opportunity ventured reptiles, testing the waters not as visitors, but as residents. Among the first of these marine reptiles were the ichthyosaurs. Their ancestors likely began as land dwellers hunting in coastal shallows, before diving deeper until they were fully aquatic. Within a few million years, they had streamlined bodies shaped so much like dolphins that from a distance you might mistake them for modern mammals. Long snouts lined with sharp teeth, enormous eyes adapted for dim underwater light, and powerful tails made them some of the most efficient predators of their age. They thrived through the Triassic and into the Jurassic, some species reaching the size of buses, true giants of the seas. But ichthyosaurs weren't alone. Around the same time, another group of reptiles adapted to aquatic life, eventually giving rise to the plesiosaurs. Unlike the sleek ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs came in varied body plans. Some had long snake-like necks and small heads, perfect for darting after fish or squid with quick snaps. Others had shorter necks and larger heads with powerful jaws, better suited for taking down larger prey. All used limbs, transformed into flippers, to propel themselves in underwater flight, like sea turtles today. These became some of the most iconic marine reptiles, their silhouettes instantly recognizable in fossils and reconstructions. The seas were not limited to reptiles alone. Ammonites, distant relatives of squid and octopuses, floated in vast numbers. Their coiled shells ranged from palm-sized spirals to massive forms nearly a meter across. They were both prey and predator, using tentacles to grab smaller creatures. Their shells are among the most common fossils of the Mesozoic, recording the rise and fall of entire ecosystems. Their cousins, the belemnites, resembled modern squid more closely, streamlined for chasing through open water. Together, ammonites and belemnites filled the seas, their populations waxing and waning with the fortunes of the reptiles and fish around them. Reef ecosystems re-established as well, though Mesozoic reefs differed from today's corals. Instead, they were often built by rudist clams, strange bivalves growing into pillars and towers, creating entire underwater landscapes. These reefs supported countless fish, crustaceans, and invertebrates, just as modern reefs do, forming hubs of biodiversity that attracted predators from far and wide. Imagine swimming through one of these reefs. The shapes odd and unfamiliar, but the effect the same. Walls and crevices teeming with life, schools of fish darting in and out, predators circling the edges, waiting for an unwary meal. After the extinction that ended the age of dinosaurs, flowering plants became the foundation of modern ecosystems, supporting the diversification of mammals, birds, and insects. But their origins trace back to that pivotal moment in the Cretaceous, when petals first unfolded and pollen first traveled with the help of wings and legs. Without that event, the world we know would not exist in its present form. The Cretaceous bloom was not a sudden explosion, but a steady spread, a transformation unfolding step by step across millions of years. Yet its impact was as profound as any dramatic extinction or evolutionary leap. By inviting animals into their lives with nectar, fruit, and shelter, flowering plants changed the rules of the game. They rewrote interactions between plants and animals, set the stage for new lineages to thrive, and filled the world with colors and scents unknown before. To walk through a Cretaceous landscape after the rise of flowering plants would have been to walk in a world both ancient and surprisingly familiar. Conifers still stood tall. Cycads with their stiff fronds persisted. But broadleaf trees, flowering shrubs, and fruits now appeared where once there had been only cones. You would hear insects buzzing, some carrying pollen from bloom to bloom. You would watch a dinosaur pause to strip leaves from a branch heavy with flowers, scattering petals to the ground. In those small moments, the transformation was visible, the beginning of a world that would outlast the giants themselves. The arrival of flowers was one of evolution's most powerful innovations. It was not loud like the roar of a predator, nor sudden like the strike of an asteroid. It was patient, persistent, and irresistible. By the end of the Cretaceous, flowers had secured their place, reshaping the surface of the earth and ensuring that when the age of dinosaurs ended, the stage was set for a new chapter in life's story. To picture an entire era stretching over 180 million years is difficult, but to picture a single day is different. A day brings it closer, shrinking vast time into a cycle we know well. The sun rises, life stirs, the world moves through its patterns, and then night falls. If you could stand in the Mesozoic, anywhere from the Triassic to the Cretaceous, you would find that the rhythm of day and night carried as much meaning as it does today. Each dawn began a new round of survival, feeding, movement, and rest. Dinosaurs, reptiles, insects, and plants all responded to the steady march of light and darkness. From these responses came the fabric of their lives. The sun at dawn would warm the land quickly. In many places, the Mesozoic climate was warmer than today's, with higher carbon dioxide levels and fewer extremes of freezing cold outside the poles. As the light spread across plains, forests, and seas, animals would stir. Herds of herbivores might rise from where they had rested, their breath visible in the coolness of early morning as they began to graze before the heat of midday. Small feathered dinosaurs might flutter down from perches in trees, calling to one another with chirps and croaks, the first sounds of the day. Insects would emerge as the temperature rose, buzzing between plants, feeding on pollen, or beginning their search for food. Near rivers and lakes, the surface might break with the movement of aquatic reptiles, a plesiosaur lifting its head above the water, a school of fish scattering, turtles clambering to warm themselves on a muddy bank. The shorelines of the Mesozoic were alive with activity from the first hours of sunlight, just as today, wetlands come alive with birds and mammals at dawn. Evening brought its own changes. As temperatures dropped, diurnal creatures would settle into shelter, while nocturnal ones emerged. Small mammals might creep from burrows to forage under starlight, safe from the larger predators dulled by darkness. Night sounds, insect calls, water lapping, the occasional roar or hiss, would weave a different tapestry than day. In this rhythm of light and shadow, the ancient world became tangible, a cycle echoing across millions of years. This day-night cycle, repeated over millions of days, formed the scaffolding of survival. It provided predictability in a world otherwise full of change. Climate shifted, continents moved, species rose and fell, but sunrise and sunset anchored life. That continuity may be why we can still glimpse ourselves in these vanished worlds. The Mesozoic's creatures were strange, but not unknowable. Their lives unfolded under the same sun and moon as ours, governed by the same physics of light and darkness. By imagining a single day, rather than an entire era, we see not just the spectacle, but the ordinariness, feeding, nesting, raising young, seeking shelter. We see the continuity that links all life, then and now. The Mesozoic was vast, but within it, each sunrise and sunset mattered, carrying the survival of countless lives forward into the next day. In that sense, every person walking today is part of the legacy of that ancient event, a living echo of survival that carried life into the Cenozoic. The fossils themselves are echoes too, silent yet powerful. When we find a skeleton preserved in stone, we are not simply seeing bones, but a memory of a life once lived. A trackway frozen in mud records the steps of a herd across a floodplain. A nest of eggs captures the moment of reproduction, an attempt to carry life forward to the next generation. Each fossil is a message across time, an imprint of existence that continues to speak long after the creatures themselves are gone. Museums are filled with these voices, lined in stone and bone. Every time we look at them, we connect across an almost unimaginable span of time. But the echoes are not only physical, they are also cultural. Dinosaurs live in our imagination in ways few other extinct creatures do. From childhood toys to films, from books to television, they have become symbols of both power and fragility. We see them as unstoppable giants, yet we also know they perished in an instant of cosmic chance. They remind us of life's strength, but also its vulnerability. This duality resonates deeply, making us reflect on our own place in Earth's story. There is something profoundly humbling in realizing that the ground beneath our feet holds these memories. Every layer of rock is a page of history, and within those pages are the remains of forests, seas, and creatures that lived long before us. The Mesozoic is not only a time of fascination for paleontologists, it is part of the foundation of our world, still shaping the form of life and the structure of ecosystems. By studying it, we learn not only about dinosaurs, but about resilience, adaptation, and the cycles of change that govern the planet. When we consider climate change today, the echoes of the Mesozoic remind us what happens when conditions shift. The warmth of that era, the rise and fall of sea levels, the impact of volcanism, and finally, the sudden catastrophe of an asteroid, all teach us that life responds to change, sometimes adapting, sometimes failing. The extinction that closed the Mesozoic warns us that stability can be fragile and that ecosystems can collapse quickly under stress. Yet in these echoes, there are lessons not only about the past, but about our future. There is continuity in the smaller details. The way birds preen their feathers, the way crocodiles slip silently through water, the way lizards bask in the sun. All are behaviors that existed in some form in the Mesozoic. They are everyday actions linking us to creatures we will never see alive, but can still understand. In this way, the Mesozoic has never truly ended. It continues through the survival of lineages, the persistence of behaviors, and the enduring shape of ecosystems. The echoes reach even further into the human imagination of time itself. To think in terms of millions of years stretches our perspective beyond the scale of our daily lives. It forces us to see that we are part of something vast, a continuity that includes creatures long gone. The Mesozoic teaches patience, humility, and awe. It reminds us we are temporary participants in a much longer story, one that began long before us and will continue long after. And so, when we step outside and hear birdsong, when we look at flowers blooming in spring, when we see mountains rising in the distance or rivers carving their paths, we are surrounded by reminders of that world. The echoes of the Mesozoic are not locked away in stone. They live on in the earth around us. Each gust of wind, each ripple in water, each wing beat of a bird is a living connection to an age we think of as lost, but which endures in countless ways. To grasp the Mesozoic is to understand that life's story is not a straight line, but a tapestry of continuities and ruptures. It shows us how disaster and renewal alternate, how resilience emerges from vulnerability, and how today's world is built on yesterday's transformations. The fossils are the punctuation marks of that story. The living creatures around us are its ongoing chapters. By studying both, we gain a sense of belonging to a history far larger than our own lifetimes. The earliest theropods, the branch of dinosaurs that included all the meat-eaters, had already appeared back in the Triassic. They were small then, more opportunists than kings of the land, living in a world still dominated by crocodile relatives and experimental reptiles. By the Jurassic, however, the picture had shifted. The extinction at the end of the Triassic had cleared away many competitors, leaving open ecological space. Theropods seized the chance and diversified. They did not all immediately grow huge, but they expanded into every available role. Some remained small, focusing on insects, lizards, or carrion. Others grew into medium-sized predators, quick enough to chase ornithopods or juvenile sauropods. Still others pushed upward into the ranks of the large carnivores, their bodies built for power, their teeth sharpened for flesh. Among the most famous of these was Allosaurus. Known from fossils in North America, Allosaurus was large but not the largest predator, about 8–10 meters long on average. What made it formidable was not just size, but design. Its skull was lined with sharp, serrated teeth, suited for slicing flesh. Its arms, though shorter than its legs, ended in three-fingered hands, tipped with strong claws. Its legs were powerful, built for bursts of speed. Fossil evidence suggests it was an active hunter capable of taking on large prey, perhaps even working in loose groups to bring down sauropods. If you imagine a scene where a herd of Diplodocus is passing across a plain, you might also picture Allosaurus trailing along, watching for the moment when a young or weakened member strayed just far enough from the safety of the herd. But Allosaurus was not alone. Across the Jurassic world, theropods of many shapes filled similar niches. In Africa, creatures like Ceratosaurus prowled the floodplains. With a distinctive horn on its snout and blade-like teeth, it was well suited to hunting along rivers and lakes, perhaps ambushing prey that came to drink. In Europe, Megalosaurus, one of the first dinosaurs ever named in scientific history, lived during the Jurassic, a mid-sized predator in forests, broken into islands by shallow seas. Each region had its apex hunters, distinct in form, but united by their role. The smaller predators were just as important. For example, Dilophosaurus was a slender, lightly built dinosaur that hunted in packs during the late Triassic and into the early Jurassic. It wasn't large, just a few meters long, but in numbers it could overwhelm prey. Its agility allowed it to dart after lizards and insects, filling a niche far from the world of the sauropods. Later, tiny theropods no bigger than chickens scurried through undergrowth, feeding on insects and small vertebrates. They were reminders that not every predator of the age was a terrifying giant. Most were small, quick, and opportunistic. This range of predator sizes created a layered system, much like ecosystems today. Large hunters controlled populations of big herbivores. Medium-sized predators focused on smaller prey, and the smallest scoured the landscape for whatever they could catch. It was a dynamic balance with competition, not only between predator and prey, but between predators themselves. Allosaurus, for example, may have clashed with Ceratosaurus in regions where their ranges overlapped, competing for access to carcasses or hunting grounds. Smaller theropods had to navigate around these giants, avoiding becoming prey themselves. Hunting strategies varied as well. Some dinosaurs were ambushers, relying on camouflage and sudden bursts of speed. Others were pursuit hunters, built to run prey down over longer distances. This web of predator-prey relationships, layered across size and geography, mirrored the complexity of modern ecosystems. No single species ruled uncontested. Instead, each success carried a cost, and each advantage sparked new adaptations in others. The constant push and pull of evolution created a world of endless experimentation. By seeing the Mesozoic through the lens of its predators, we understand its dynamism. It was not just an age of giant herbivores, but a stage filled with hunters of every size, each with its own strategies, senses, and roles. This diversity ensured that ecosystems remained resilient, balanced, and interconnected. And from these predatory lineages would eventually emerge the ancestors of birds, carrying forward the predatory legacy into a new form of flight. Beyond the famous giants and predators, much of the Mesozoic's richness came from the quiet persistence of its smaller, less celebrated creatures. They formed the hidden scaffolding of ecosystems: pollinators, burrowers, scavengers, and prey animals, sustaining the great food webs. Early mammals, though tiny, were extraordinarily adaptable. Many were nocturnal insect eaters, emerging under cover of darkness to avoid the large reptiles of the day. Others experimented with gliding membranes, digging claws, or omnivorous diets. These traits helped their descendants survive the catastrophe at the end of the Cretaceous and diversify in the Cenozoic. Insects, too, were shaping the world. Long before flowering plants arrived, beetles, dragonflies, and other groups were already abundant, recycling plant matter and pollinating gymnosperms in more limited ways. With the spread of flowering plants, insects became even more integral, carrying pollen from bloom to bloom and accelerating the expansion of angiosperms. This coevolution transformed landscapes quietly, but profoundly. Plants were also continually rewriting Earth's atmosphere. As they spread across new territories, they captured carbon dioxide, released oxygen, and stabilized soils. Conifers anchored vast forests, cycads dotted open plains, and ginkgo trees fanned out distinctive leaves along rivers. Horsetails and ferns formed dense undergrowth. These plants were not passive scenery, but active engineers of their environment, influencing climate and creating habitats for countless other species. Even the seas were full of overlooked players. Small fish, crustaceans, plankton, and mollusks fed the great marine reptiles and ammonites. Coral-like rudist reefs supported entire food chains. As in modern oceans, most life existed at small scales, an invisible engine sustaining the visible giants. The balance of these systems was delicate, but remarkably durable across millions of years, punctuated by moments of sudden upheaval. The geography of the Mesozoic shaped life as well. Continents drifted slowly but steadily. Mountains rose and eroded. Seaways opened and closed. Climates shifted with latitude and ocean currents. As Pangaea broke apart, new coastlines and inland seas appeared, fragmenting populations and encouraging diversification. Species isolated on islands evolved unique adaptations. Others moved into fresh habitats, opened by changing rivers or retreating deserts. This constant rearrangement of land and sea was as powerful a force as evolution itself, reshaping opportunities and challenges for every organism. All of this movement, of continents, of climates, of species, created a planet in flux. Yet despite the changes, there was a recognizable rhythm. The daily rise and fall of the sun, the seasonal shifts of temperature and rainfall, the slow turnover of generations. Life adapted not to a static stage, but to a moving target, a world that never stopped transforming. If you could stand at the edge of a Cretaceous floodplain, you would see herds of hadrosaurs moving like living rivers, their calls echoing across wetlands. Ceratopsians with ornate frills and horns grazed nearby, defending their young with defensive circles. Small mammals darted between roots, insects hummed in clouds, and pterosaurs glided overhead like living kites. Each part of this scene relied on the others. Remove the plants and the herbivores would vanish. Remove the insects and the plants would falter. Remove the predators and the system would collapse under imbalance. This interconnectedness is one of the Mesozoic's enduring lessons. No species existed alone. Every adaptation created ripples across the web of life. The rise of flowering plants reshaped diets. The appearance of new predators changed herds' behavior. Shifts in climate altered migration routes and breeding seasons. Everything was in dialogue with everything else. By appreciating this interconnectedness, we see why the Mesozoic's extinction events were so devastating. They did not simply eliminate a few species, but tore holes in the fabric of life, unraveling relationships built over millions of years. Yet from these losses came new relationships, new forms, and new worlds. The same cycles that shaped the Mesozoic continue today, though on human timescales, we rarely perceive them. When we reconstruct these ancient worlds from bones, pollen grains, and isotopes, we are not only describing the past, but also glimpsing the deep rules of ecology. We see how energy moves through systems, how resilience is built, and how fragility can grow unnoticed until a threshold is crossed. This knowledge is not only scientific, but also philosophical, reminding us of our own vulnerability and our own place in the web of life. As the Mesozoic continued, the sheer diversity of herbivorous dinosaurs reshaped entire landscapes. Herds of sauropods could strip a valley of foliage, then move on, allowing forests to regrow in cycles of disturbance and renewal. Ceratopsians defended their young in tight formations. Hadrosaurs with complex dental batteries processed tough vegetation, reshaping plant communities through their feeding. Armored dinosaurs, such as ankylosaurs and stegosaurs, changed the dynamics of predation by evolving living shields of bone and spikes. Each innovation in plant-eating dinosaurs reverberated across ecosystems, altering predator strategies, plant reproduction, and even the flow of nutrients in soils and rivers. Predators responded in turn. Large theropods tracked migrating herds, while medium-sized hunters patrolled the edges, waiting for an opportunity. Small, fast predators darted after insects, lizards, and hatchlings. This cascade of adaptations produced a balanced but ever-changing system. Dinosaurs were not simply creatures in a static environment. They were agents of change, shaping their world as much as being shaped by it. In the oceans, marine reptiles also diversified. Mosasaurs rose to prominence in the late Cretaceous, replacing ichthyosaurs as apex predators of the sea. Some mosasaurs reached lengths over 15 meters, with double-hinged jaws and flexible skulls for swallowing large prey. Plesiosaurs persisted as well, their long necks and powerful flippers cutting through coastal waters. Giant turtles, fish, and sharks completed the picture, creating marine ecosystems every bit as complex as those on land. Above the waves, pterosaurs achieved their greatest diversity. From sparrow-sized forms to creatures with wingspans rivaling small airplanes, they occupied niches from coastal fishers to inland scavengers. The earliest birds coexisted with them, testing new shapes of wings and beaks, refining the flight that would carry their descendants into the Cenozoic. The skies of the Mesozoic were as alive as its oceans and plains, layered with predators, prey, and opportunists. Climate remained a powerful player throughout. Warm greenhouse conditions extended forests into high latitudes. Seasonal rains created lush wetlands and floodplains. Periodic droughts stressed populations and forced migrations. Volcanic activity injected pulses of gases into the atmosphere, briefly altering temperatures and precipitation patterns. This variability fostered adaptability. Species that could cope with swings in climate tended to survive and spread. As the continents drifted further apart, the planet's geography began to resemble our own. The Atlantic Ocean widened. Mountains rose along collision zones. Inland seas formed and retreated. Isolated ecosystems evolved unique faunas, some of which vanished entirely when sea levels fell or climates shifted. The map of the world was redrawn again and again, and with each redrawing came opportunities for life to branch, experiment, and flourish. By the late Cretaceous, flowering plants and pollinators had fully transformed terrestrial ecosystems. Forests mixed broadleaf trees with conifers. Insects swarmed in unprecedented numbers and variety. Birds experimented with songs, plumage, and nesting styles. Mammals remained small, but increasingly diverse in shape and behavior. Together, these groups created a dynamic, multi-layered world where energy flowed through countless channels. If you could walk through such a landscape, you might see a towering sauropod pulling down branches heavy with seed pods, while smaller dinosaurs dart among its feet. Nearby, a ceratopsian herd browses shrubs, their frills catching the sunlight. In the undergrowth, early mammals forage for insects, while dragonflies hover above a pond, thick with turtles. Overhead, a pterosaur glides silently, its shadow flickering across flowers that never existed in the Jurassic. Every detail would be alive with movement and interdependence. This was the world that faced the twin pressures of volcanism and asteroid impact at the end of the Cretaceous. Its richness makes its sudden collapse all the more striking. Yet even as we focus on the catastrophe, we should remember the long prelude of stability and complexity that preceded it. Hundreds of millions of sunrises and sunsets, countless generations of creatures living ordinary days in extraordinary times. The Mesozoic's ultimate lesson is not just about extinction, but about persistence. Across its vast span, life rebuilt after disaster, diversified under changing climates, and reached extraordinary heights of size and complexity. Its final cataclysm was not the end of life, but the end of one configuration of life, clearing the stage for new players to emerge. Today, as we look at the living world, we see its legacy everywhere. In every bird's wingbeat, in every flowering plant, in the shape of continents and the chemistry of our atmosphere, the Mesozoic endures. It surrounds us not only in rocks and fossils, but in the air we breathe, the soil we stand on, and the patterns of life unfolding around us. If you step back from the famous scenes of the Mesozoic, the giant predators, the towering herbivores, the mass extinctions, another pattern emerges. It is the pattern of deep time itself. Cycles of innovation, expansion, crisis, and renewal. This was not an age of endless stability. It was an age of experiment. Evolution tested countless body plans, strategies, and behaviors. Some flourished for millions of years, others flickered briefly and vanished. The fossils we recover are not just trophies of giants, but records of this relentless creativity. In each period of the Mesozoic, you see life filling available space. After the Permian extinction, reptiles diversified into forms unimaginable before. After the Triassic-Jurassic boundary, dinosaurs expanded to dominate the land. After each disruption, plants and animals reorganized into new webs of interaction. This rhythm of collapse and renewal is as much a part of Earth's story as mountain building or ocean currents. It is a reminder that change is not the exception, but the rule. Geology and biology were intertwined. Volcanic eruptions altered climate and created new habitats. Continental drift rearranged coastlines and migration routes. Sea levels rose and fell, flooding continental interiors or exposing vast plains. Each physical change set off biological changes, and vice versa. Plants stabilized soils and altered atmospheric gases. Animals dispersed seeds and shaped vegetation. Feedback loops spanned the entire planet. The Mesozoic also shows us that dominance is temporary. Crocodile-like reptiles once outnumbered dinosaurs. Later, they retreated to rivers and swamps, while dinosaurs diversified. Ichthyosaurs ruled the oceans, then vanished as mosasaurs and plesiosaurs rose. Pterosaurs pioneered the skies, but birds inherited their legacy. Even within lineages, turnover was constant, new species replacing old, new adaptations displacing the familiar. This constant turnover produced remarkable biodiversity. In some Jurassic floodplains, dozens of dinosaur species may have shared the same region, each exploiting different foods, behaviors, or times of day. Small differences allowed coexistence: beak shape, neck length, nesting strategy, or preferred climate. The world was not divided into a few giants, but crowded with specialists. We also glimpse the beginnings of modern ecosystems in the Mesozoic. Predator-prey dynamics, pollination, seed dispersal, migration, and seasonal breeding all echo patterns we see today. Birds carry the genetics of theropod dinosaurs. Crocodilians echo their Triassic ancestors. Flowering plants carry the memory of their Cretaceous expansion. The modern world is not a replacement, but a continuation of the Mesozoic in a new configuration. Thinking on these timescales changes how we see ourselves. Human civilization is a flicker compared to the age of dinosaurs, yet we too are part of these cycles. We live in an era of rapid environmental change, much of it of our own making. The Mesozoic teaches that no system is too large to fail, but also that life is remarkably resilient. After each collapse, new forms arise, new patterns emerge, and the story continues. Imagine standing at a high point in the late Cretaceous, looking out over a landscape alive with creatures unlike anything today. You would see evidence of deep time everywhere, sediments laid down by ancient rivers, mountains rising slowly, coastlines retreating and advancing. You would sense the impermanence of everything, yet also the continuity. The same sun rises and sets, the same stars wheel overhead. Life responds to the same basic pressures: to eat, to reproduce, to avoid being eaten, to endure. The Mesozoic's true grandeur is not only in its size, but in its scope. It invites us to step outside our narrow window of human experience and witness a planet in motion over millions of years. It reminds us that we belong to a history larger than ourselves, one in which extinction and survival, collapse and renewal are normal processes. In every fossil and every living bird, in every flowering plant and every drifting continent, the Mesozoic continues. Its creatures may be gone, but their influence shapes the present. We are not separate from that story, but part of its ongoing chapter. To journey through time is to see this continuity and to recognize the ancient threads running through our modern world. Standing back and looking at the full sweep of the Mesozoic, what becomes clear is its paradoxical nature. It was an age of giants and of tiny survivors, of violent upheaval and long stretches of quiet continuity. It was both alien and familiar, a planet ruled by reptiles, but governed by the same fundamental forces of physics, chemistry, and ecology that shape life today. Its creatures were remarkable not only for their strangeness, but for how recognizable their lives seem when stripped of form and seen as patterns of behavior. Imagine the slow rise of dawn across a Cretaceous floodplain. A mist hangs low over cycads and flowering shrubs. Herds of hadrosaurs stir, shaking dew from their hides, their young pressed close for safety. Dragonflies skim the surface of a quiet pond, where turtles haul themselves onto logs warmed by the first rays of the sun. Far off, a tyrannosaur's call rolls like distant thunder, sending ripples of tension through the herd. Above, a pterosaur glides, tilting its wings to the rising thermals. Every part of this moment is a continuation of cycles that stretch back hundreds of millions of years. By midday, the landscape is alive with sound and movement. Herbivores graze methodically, their jaws grinding tough vegetation. Small mammals scurry between roots, avoiding both predators and the heat of the sun. Insects pollinate flowers, spiders spin webs between stems, and amphibians lurk in muddy shallows. The heat drives many animals into shade or water, creating subtle shifts in activity across the day. Evening cools the air and draws nocturnal life outward. This rhythm, day and night, hot and cool, predator and prey, was the unbroken heartbeat of the Mesozoic. Across this vast time span, Earth's crust was never still. Mountain chains rose, volcanic eruptions reshaped continents, and oceans opened and closed. Each change was an opportunity and a threat. Species vanished, new ones arose. Ecosystems split, recombined, or collapsed entirely. Yet through it all, life persisted. The Mesozoic is a lesson in both impermanence and resilience. Fossils allow us to reconstruct these worlds in extraordinary detail. Impressions of feathers, skin, and even color patterns have been found, revealing that many dinosaurs were feathered, colorful, and more bird-like than reptilian in appearance. Trace fossils, footprints, burrows, coprolites, capture behaviors frozen in time. These records show not only what animals were, but what they did, how they moved, hunted, fed, and interacted. They are snapshots of vanished lives preserved for tens of millions of years. When we walk through a natural history museum, we are moving among ghosts. Yet those ghosts are not gone. Birds fly overhead every day, their bones hollow and their wings feathered, living descendants of theropod dinosaurs. Flowering plants bloom in our gardens, tracing their lineage back to the Cretaceous. Crocodiles slip through rivers as their ancestors did when the first dinosaurs emerged. In our very bodies, in our cells and DNA, is the legacy of creatures that survived ancient extinctions. The Mesozoic also challenges our sense of human importance. Our entire recorded history is a blink compared to its span. Civilizations have risen and fallen, while continents barely moved a fraction of an inch. By learning to think in such long arcs, we gain humility and perspective. We see our environmental impacts, not just in decades, but in geological time. We recognize that the choices we make echo into the future, just as events in the distant past shaped our present. Ultimately, the Mesozoic's greatest story may be that of continuity. Despite mass extinctions, shifting continents, and changing climates, life found ways to persist. It transformed, but did not stop. It adapted, diversified, and survived. This continuity binds us to everything that came before and everything that will come after. Journeying through this age, across its Triassic experiments, its Jurassic abundance, and its Cretaceous flowering, is to witness life's capacity for reinvention. It is also to glimpse our own origins, to understand that the world we inhabit is built on foundations laid by creatures long vanished. The air we breathe, the landscapes we traverse, the plants we eat, and the birds that sing above us are all part of that legacy. Through the entire sweep of the Mesozoic, we have followed Earth across 180 million years of transformation. From the fragile beginnings after the Permian extinction, to the rise of dinosaurs, the bloom of flowering plants, the surge of marine reptiles, and finally, the asteroid strike that ended an age. We have seen how continents drifted, climates shifted, and life adapted again and again. We have watched ordinary days unfold beneath alien skies, and extraordinary events rewrite the rules of survival. The Mesozoic is more than an age of giants. It is a testament to resilience, innovation, and continuity. It shows how ecosystems recover after catastrophe, how species evolve to fill new niches, and how the foundations of our modern world were laid by creatures long vanished. In its fossils, we read the stories of patience and upheaval, of power and vulnerability, of life's relentless creativity. It also shows us ourselves. Birds on a wire, crocodiles in a river, flowers opening to the morning sun. All are living bridges to that distant era. Every breath of oxygen owes something to ancient forests. Every coastline owes something to continental drift, set in motion millions of years ago. Every living thing carries within it the echo of survival through deep time. To journey through the Mesozoic is to step outside our brief moment and see the planet as a living, changing system. It is to recognize that nothing lasts forever, but that life, given the chance, endures. It adapts, transforms, and continues. This perspective brings humility and awe, and perhaps a sense of responsibility for the world we are shaping now. Thank you for joining this exploration. As the lights dim and the echoes of deep time fade, remember that this is only one chapter in Earth's story. Countless others stretch behind and ahead, waiting to be discovered. Until next time, may the past inspire you to see the present with new eyes and the future with wonder. This has been Journey Through Time. Thank you for traveling with us across the ancient world.